Appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, I'm James Jean-Claude. I'm the organizer for this event. Thank you for coming out. I know I've invited several meetup groups, so whichever meetup group you're a part of, thank you very much for coming out. We're very lucky to have a great speaker today. I mean, he has a high-profile job with a well-known company. I'm sure there are a million other things he could do, but lucky enough, he's here to speak with us. And I want to thank Kirby Cofino, who's an IGDA member and also a deputy board member, helping me out with the speakers. And it was his suggestion that we invite Luke, and I thank you for that. And as you see by the turnout, it was a very good suggestion. So thank you for that. And we have another board member, Micah Fall over there. Micah is the chair of the DC IGDA chapter, and so if you have any ideas or requests for the group, feel free to reach out to him after the event and talk. So before we start with the speaker, I wanted to also thank our host. Car Workspaces is kind enough to host us today, and from there we have Grace Maupin. She's the general manager for this facility. I want to give her a couple minutes to say hello.
I'll be very, very brief. Thank you all for coming. Car Workplaces, we're a shared office provider. We're based here in Washington, D.C. Our founder is Oliver T. Carr. Real estate, kind of matriarch in the D.C. area. But we have 7 locations in the district. This is our DuPont location. We have a location in K Street, Georgetown, Capitol Hill, City Center, as well as the Willard. We also have locations in Reston and Tysons and Alexandria, Clarendon, Roslyn, Bethesda, and Chevy Chase. The great thing about CAR is that we are a shared office provider, much like probably the WeWorks that you've probably been in and make offices and things of that nature. One of the differences is that we're very much service forward. So we have, not only do we have private offices, we have virtual offices if you need a meeting room or conference room space or address plan. We also have cafe plans, so a lot of the freelancers, road warriors, independent workers, if you ever need a place to work, much like the cafe space you see or the dedicated desk there in the back, if you want to go take a look, for $35 a month you can have access to all of our locations 5 days a week. And so if you have any questions or want to learn more or want to get a free week trial to test drive any of our spaces, you can feel free to just say hello to me as you leave, and I can get your information to get you signed up for a free trial. There's no commitment, no payment information required. It's really just having you guys come and test out our coffee and see if it's a productive place where you guys can work. So, thank y'all.
Are you serious with it? Your cheapest membership plan is $35 a month?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna be signing up after this event.
Right. Thank y'all.
I mean, that's cheaper than buying coffees at Starbucks so you don't feel guilty loitering. So, anyway, thank you very much again for coming out. Without any further ado, Luke and Kirby are going to take over the show.
Thanks, James. Hey gang, how's it going? Hi, so like James said, I work for National Geographic. I'm actually the UX design and UX director, which is maybe a meta point. Why the heck did they split those two things out? And so hopefully we get to answer that a little bit during this. I teach at American University in the computer science department, mostly about UI evaluation, so that's a lot of usability testing, which we'll talk about, which I think is a pretty relevant part of how UX in games might meet. But then there's also parts where they don't meet whatsoever, and after I go through a couple diagrams that I think should help explain UX and UI and games. Kirby's prepared a couple questions, some brain busters for me that I'll stumble through, and then we'll open it up and talk to you all about some questions you might have. This is purposefully pretty Nat Geo agnostic, but if there is anything specific about National Geographic or media and UX and media companies, I'm happy to answer those questions too. I've previously worked for Yahoo and Wall Street Journal. Okay, so without further ado, my first diagram for you today. The first diagram for you is a pretty simple one. None of these diagrams are my own. They're just from all of the crazy books that I read. So the very first one, let's start actually with learn. Learn, make, Make, show, learn. Okay, so this is a pretty simplified version of a UX process or a design process. The goal, I usually always try to start out with learn, but I've had clients where I'm freelance where I've had to start out with show because something has already been made. Let me go into each one of these things a little bit. For those of you who thought that UX was, okay, show of hands, if you agree with this statement, UX is a process. Show of hands, show of hands. Okay, that's a decent set. Okay, UX is about output. It is about the thing that gets made. Any show of hands on that one? Okay, solid, good. And then for those of you who didn't answer one of those, you guys are probably more right than the other two because I bet it bleeds into both. So with the learning one, there's a few different methods that you can use to learn about things. Some of them are interview methods, user research methods. And I feel like those have nothing to do with game design, although I could be convinced otherwise. One of the games that I have worked on in the past was, and I think I was describing it to someone earlier as a location-based storytelling game. And when I was talking to Kirby about this a little bit, Kirby, one of my former AU students who's got some good questions for me later, we were saying like, okay, well, if you interview somebody, and one of the ways that I think is a really simple way to interview somebody for a UX research method is something that I call the 4 lists method. And the 4 lists method is pains, pleasures, those are the 2 easy ones, and then contexts and behaviors. So a context, time or place, and a behavior pretty much just like a verb or something, some sort of action. And so if I have something that I'm super interested in, like how educators get content about the environment in their classroom. Okay, fine, I'm going to talk about Nat Geo a little bit. I'll ask them things like, list out all of the painful parts of doing that. And so I'll give them 5 minutes and they start to list things out. And I'm not actively asking them questions because I'm trying not to bias them with what I think is the right way to do it. I've got plenty of ideas, but I'm not gonna get into that until the make part. And I really try to split these parts out. So the painful parts, they'll make a list. The pleasurable parts, they'll make a list. These are the nice things about this, these are the good things about this. And then they'll list out some actions as well, like showing something, or taking a field trip, or answering questions. Those are verbs and actions that teachers might have to do when trying to get their content into a classroom. And then the contexts would be things like, during finals, or preparing for a state standardized test, or when writing at home, or something like that. So you've got a couple different places, a couple different times. Now with those 4 different lists, what I do is then ask people all about them. And I basically just ask one question over and over again, which is, tell me more about this. I guess that's not much of a question. Tell me more about this. And they'll have some sort of pain point or pleasure point, and usually it'll connect to each other. Maybe a pain leads to a pleasure, or a lack of a pleasure point leads to a pain, or this only happens at home, or this only happens in a classroom. And understanding all of those contexts and like verbs or other different pieces that they have, those help me understand basically a problem with a lot of information coming from the user, not just my own head. And that's the space where I'm like, do game designers need to do that? Do they need to ask somebody, what's the painful part of playing this game? Or what's the painful part of avoiding boredom? Or something even more abstract than that. And I'm not totally sure that there's a good connection there. But so I'm gonna start with my unsure stuff, throw that one out to y'all, so maybe I could learn something. Does anyone, who in here is from the game side of the meetup, the meetups that were in the games? Louis, have you ever interviewed anyone to understand about, what you want to make?
You show a demo, you ask them.
So that's down here. That's after when we're getting into the usability part. But before you've even made anything, you want to know, what exactly do I want to make? Do you ever talk to, ask people about, what do you want to see? Things like that?
I'm sure it's done. I'm sure game studios actually engage in that in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But I haven't personally done that. So.
Yeah, Kirby was saying that, was it your brother?
Yeah.
Brother, does this, but more from a marketing angle or a branding angle, and I guess I could see that being there, but I don't know what someone from some AAA game studios is going to be allowed to say, or maybe they did. Maybe they're like, you know what, Kratos needs a kid. I don't know if that's how that works, but I think that that's one of the places where UX and games don't actually really meet that well. So what can you learn then? Louis alluded to it. It has to do with showing something. So let's go backwards. If we show off a game and you play test it, or you do a usability test it, that's basically a form of learning, but it's based off of one specific thing. You show someone something and you see what they can do with it. Now, there's all kinds of differences, I think, with usability of a tool like so I've worked on things that help publishers or journalists or writers, tell their story. And so maybe that comes out in the form of some sort of article page template that has ways of linking other articles together. And it's not just through, standard hyperlinks. And so if I show this to someone and what they're trying to do there is to prove whether or not the style that I've come up with to show this linking or this interaction, is that actually going to help someone do it? And if I see that they're unable to do it, then I've learned that and I'm going to go back to my drawing board and start to make something again right before I show them. So that's some of the learning stuff that I think really does tie well into UX, is the usability side of things. And there's all kinds of great books out there on usability, and I'm sure there are very specific slices of usability that make more sense for games. But some of the top things I think that make sense in here are about unmoderated experiences. And so what I mean by that is you're not there telling someone, guiding them through, saying oh, go this and go here and try this, or click on that button and then tell me what you think you see, what you saw. That is too much hand-holding. You're kind of guiding someone along through an experience. When some of my colleagues will have a usability test, they'll say things like, something that happened recently was, let's post a new thread in this forum. Well, the button in the forum said post. And just framing your task like that by saying the word that's in the UI is going to ruin the entire test. And so there's really simple good rules and best practices that you can find out that I think probably do carry over between games and usability testing that's in digital products and tools. So usability testing, I think, is a big part of that, and that has to do with the show. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is through unmoderated testing. The making part, let's get into that into my next diagram. I want to make sure that I'm not going to fly through this too quick. Any questions on this kind of cycle of stuff? It's pretty simple, right? Any ideas? Okay, let's dive into the make bit a little bit more. Okay, so when making something, there are a couple of interesting people who come from the Stanford Design School, and in particular, this one guy, BJ Fogg. Anyone ever heard of him, BJ Fogg? He's got something called the behavior model. And that behavior model says that if you're trying to get somebody to do something, there's an axis of, ease of doing it and motivation. And there's a sweet spot in there. And so without going too much into the motivation side of things, let me break down the ease of doing it. And somebody named, what was his name? Stephen something or other. His book is called Designing for Behavior Change. And he's writing all about a financial product that's trying to get people to save money better. And he talks about something called the create action funnel. Woo! So it's a funnel. And the create is not spelled exactly right, but it is an acronym, and that means it must be worth something. And so the create action funnel is cue, reaction, evaluation, ability, and timing. And if you think about interactions, any interaction, like even if it's not a physical haptic reaction, if it's just a glance to look at something, there can be cues that are, what's a cue in interaction design that might solicit somebody to look at something? Anyone?
Color?
Let's say that this cue happens and you're not looking at it yet, but you're definitely right on the right track. So you're not looking at something, there's a cue, and now you're looking at it. That's what the desired outcome was. Give me an example. What are you thinking?
Let's see, for example, the right bottom corner, there's the whole book goes up and down that says to top.
Okay, let's imagine you're not even looking at your display whatsoever.
Okay.
Sound.
Sound, perfect, good. And I thought you were gonna, when you said motion, I thought you were thinking, and I kind of gave it away, haptics, like some sort of vibration or something like that. But those are two cues, sound as well, to cue somebody. But sound and a vibration, those are just going to get you to start to look at the display. Then you start to have to think about things like contrast and color that help people, understand exactly where to look on the display, maybe in which corner that you want to look at. And so motion is a great one because the cues that are hardwired in our brain cross-culturally are what is the difference between something at motion and something at rest. And you are hardwired to know if that bus is coming at you or if it's just parked. And that's going to help you stay out of the way of the bus. And so those kinds of cues can be they can be tied to things that are part of nature, like motion, or color and contrast. Or they can be tied to new languages, new patterns that we are now familiar with. So that's where you get into user interface stuff. Hamburger button, anyone? No? Yes? No? It's there, people know it and recognize it, you're smiling, and so now that I know that you know, I'm gonna use it because I know you know it. And it does things, it's an interesting UI paradigm. It breaks one of my #1 rules, or it's just part of one of my #1 rules, which is when you hide things, they are hidden. And so, in most laws, right, like they're